I call the Tuesday, January 15th, 2019 meeting of the Long Meadow School Committee's Finance Subcommittee to order. This meeting is being recorded, live streamed, and aired live by LCTV. We don't have any guests, so I'm going to move into approval of the minutes. I move to approve the Finance Subcommittee minutes dated December 3rd, 2018 as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. I move to approve the Finance Subcommittee minutes dated December 17th, 2018
Second.
as presented. Second. I actually want to just make one change on those two. It's just more of a, just to put the visitor for the one community member, so it doesn't look like.
On the 12-17 meeting?
Yeah, so just to put that. So it's not really a correction. I think I need to separate those who are present on the Finance Subcommittee from the visitor. So even,
You just want me to put a space?
yeah, you can just note that they're a visitor and not a community member
Sure.
who was participating as a,
So, but would you want that indicated in terms of myself and Marty? Or-
no, because you're part of the,
So
sub- a part of the subcommittee.
Mike Saprina.
not on that one. Oh, I'm
He's
talking,
on those minutes.
which one are you on?
I was on
17.
12-17, but I didn't know.
Yes, 1217, I have under, Mike is your, yeah, well, he's your
He's really a
intern.
visitor, though, to the
Okay, so then
meeting,
put the two.
Okay, as
Okay,
visitors.
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Okay.
just to, because
Um,
they're not part of the
On
subcommittee.
both sets. We'll amend it to acknowledge,
If, yeah,
As
he's an
visitors.
intern, right?
I think that's an
Okay.
appropriate way to acknowledge it.
I don't know if it's so much, I mean, so I'm going to revise my motion to approve the Finance Subcommittee minutes dated December 17th as amended.
Okay, second.
All those in favor? I think you can make that amendment on the first one without us having to
Okay.
redo the motion. All right, and then we'll move into the budget.
So, Tom and I spent some time this afternoon going back to Paul Pasterzik's projections that he had provided the select board and the school committee in the joint meeting. And so, just to look at this through the widest lens possible, I took his spreadsheet and just sort of rolled it into the total revenue that Paul was projecting and the total costs he was projecting, uses the word sources and uses. And so you'll recall that it would create a gap of about $412,000. And additionally then, if the town chose to raise revenue at 2% of, instead of the 2.5% levy limit, it would add to the gap and create a gap of $653,000. So that's the broader context that we're working in. So one of the things that we hope to accomplish tonight is to maybe get some input, some direction from Finance Sub around sort of the requests that we want to submit as part of the budget. So, and again, for anybody that might be watching at home, January 23rd is the budget presentation to the school committee, and then I think we're zeroing in on February 5th as the public hearing for the budget. And so the other way of looking at this is sort of a bottom line portion of a spreadsheet that Paul had also shared with us. It's just another way of looking at the same budget picture. And so, as Paul had identified what was available for discretionary use, he proposed two scenarios. One was a scenario that identified $955,000 as being available for discretionary use. The other identified $616,000 is being available for discretionary use. The difference between these two figures relates to the select board's policies with regard to contributions to the OPEB fund and contributions to their capital fund. And so depending on whether those policies were exercised to the fullest extent, it would leave town users with either $955,000 in what he would describe as discretionary use or $616,000. When you break that into school and non-school, it would leave us with either $689,000 in potential increase to the general fund or $444,000 in potential increase to the general fund. So that's kind of the wide context that is based on the projections that the town treasurer had given us. And so from that, Tom obviously started to identify in very specific ways what our potential sources of revenue are and what our potential costs will be. And as we'll see, so much of the costs that we incur are our contractual obligations. And so whether you're talking the cost of living increases or the step increases, the lane changes associated with our contractual obligations, we are really already in a place where we're going to have to be creative in terms of figuring out how we can meet those contractual obligations. And given the projections, and these go back to October, and I think Paul would even say that they were conservative and based on early information, and the budget picture will become increasingly clear in the weeks ahead. The governor's budget, we're not sure when that's going to be released. Typically, it is maybe next week would be what we could expect, but the governor has some additional time, given that it was an election year recently. So the revenue projections are becoming clearer, the cost projections are becoming clearer, and so we just need to sort of figure out how we can present the budget to the school committee that really is tied into the goals that we've set up for ourselves and helps us maintain existing services and potentially improve upon, build upon existing services. So that's our sort of our starting point. And we had submitted to you for the packet tonight a list of budget considerations, and we can kind of walk through these items and talk to you about the, sort of the direction that some of these costs are heading in, and then get some feedback from you as a finance subcommittee on what your priorities might be, or what, how you want us to pull the budget presentation together for January 23rd. So sort of, maybe we can stop there for a minute. You want to, is there any questions that we might be able to answer with regard to the town's position relative to their revenue projections and cost projections? Is there anything? I gave you the sort of the bottom line detail, but there's obviously a lot of detail behind the figures that I just presented. So anything?
That was given a while ago. Has it changed?
I have not received any updated numbers. I don't know that Paul would necessarily update this projection until we get some concrete figures from the state. I don't know that there's enough in terms of the other areas for the assumptions, especially around sources, that would help move it enough to warrant updating those projections.
I think I remember these figures being consistent with what was given to us at our tri-board
These are exactly the
meeting.
same
Yeah.
numbers, yeah.
So,
So
and
no,
that
I-
was
Recent.
October?
Yeah, it was, I want to say the end of October when we
Yeah.
did the joint meeting with the Select Board and Finance Committee.
Yeah.
So the contractual obligations that are sort of first, go ahead, Tommy.
No.
That's sort of first up on the list there. Roughly I mean, we have some rough projections around what that would have cost us alone, just meeting those contractual obligations.
Yeah, I think a couple meetings ago, I gave you some preliminary information on steps and COLA, and I think that was about $750,000. At the time, we hadn't passed the deadline for employees to submit for lane changes for next year, for FY20, so we have all of those requests now. That's going to be about another $95,000, so combining all three of those items under the contractual obligations, we're looking at about an $850,000 increase to FY20's budget over FY19's salary lines.
Then as you roll down into staffing, the good news is we'll be in a position to make some enrollment-related adjustments. Obviously, you want staffing to respond to enrollment changes regularly. So with 5 sections at the 5th grade at both Blueberry and Center, we're anticipating a reduction of four sections. We're anticipating a reduction of a section at Center and a couple sections at Blueberry. And that would be also assuming that we have 3 kindergarten classrooms coming in at each of our elementary schools. So we've started to take a look at the census data, and we're below where we were this time last year in terms of the potential number of kindergarten registrants. You'll recall that in this academic year, we needed to add a 4th classroom at both Blueberry and Center. And if the census data, if it holds, don't anticipate that will be the case. It looks like we'll be in a position to run 3 sections at the kindergarten level at all 3 elementary schools. Way too early to talk about what class size might look like at the kindergarten level in the 3 elementary schools, but we do anticipate having the reductions at Center and Blueberry because there'll be essentially more sections going out the door than there are coming in the door. And so it wouldn't have any, these are, I want to be careful even using the word reduction. Really, it's an enrollment-related adjustment that will still allow us to maintain existing class size patterns. The other piece of it in staffing that we want to bring to your attention is it relates to the 5th grade that'll be rolling into 6th grade next year. And I know that we pride ourselves on maintaining really manageable class size that's sort of optimal for the budget and optimal for learning. And so we have a bit of a bubble rolling into 6th grade, and potentially about there's 109 students rolling into Glenbrook based on our current projections, about 118 rolling into Williams. And then there's some additional students who would need to be assigned by us because they might be children of staff members or choice students, or Medco students. So this is what we just put together, some data on what we're projecting for class size at Glenbrook and Williams, and gave you some historical data as well, just to give you some sense of what the 6th grade has historically looked like. So current projection would have a class size of 24, 25 at the 6th grade at Glenbrook, or 23 or 24 at Williams. This is with 5 sections at each school, but it really is in line with where we've been historically. Maybe it's something I think we'd have to continue to watch and keep our eyes on it. If this was the recommendation that is brought to the school committee on the 23rd, if the budget is built with this assumption in mind. we would want to monitor this throughout the spring and into the summer. So that's kind of one of the big budget factors for us right now. And any feedback you have for us, any input, any direction, would be helpful as we sort of finalize this budget picture for you. So maybe we can, I don't know if you want to stop there, or if you want us to just go through the list and then kind of consider it as a whole. You have a preference?
Well, I think outside of the district goals, school committee goals, we would have to hear, I think it would help to hear a little bit about the information that you've gotten from admin and where they
So
stand.
just kind of run through, get the whole picture before we zero in on any one factor?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So staffing, Tom does a nice job of tracking retirements and kind of identifying places where there might be some savings as employees retire, as teachers retire, and other teachers, other good teachers are come in on the, probably lower on the pay scale. So the attrition savings, I think, are fairly typical. It's not any, it's sort of what we have seen in recent years. Not any higher or any lower than what we typically see. Out-of-district tuitions, we're expecting that out-of-district tuition costs will go down, but the problem, as we've talked about recently, is that circuit breaker will go down by probably a greater number, and so ultimately, the general fund would have to absorb the costs related to out-of-district tuitions. It'll be a factor that we'll have to keep our eyes on. But so, good news. It's always that we're a victim of our success in developing inclusive programs here in the district. But the downside of that is that circuit breaker reimbursement goes down as you develop these more inclusive programs. Contracted services, Tom can probably speak more specifically to this if you're interested. So general increases, general year-to-year increases, particularly in the area of natural gas. Number 5 on your list relates to extracurricular investments. You asked about the priorities of the admin team. I think this would be fairly high on the list. I think our middle school principals especially are interested in ensuring that we have made an adequate investment in extracurriculars. I think it is an area where you get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of keeping kids engaged after school, and as we talk about ways to build positive adult connections, I think one of the greatest ways to do that is with extracurricular programming. And even at the high school, same thing there. I mean, the kids are kids are really chomping at the bit to be involved in after-school activities, and I think our principals would say that if there is an opportunity, they'd appreciate the chance to make an investment in this area. Supplies, I think this is where we might need some feedback from the committee. Committee made an additional effort in FY19, this academic year, to increase the supply lines. I think that was a great idea because ultimately we were able to kind of take some of the pressure off of parents to supply ordinary school supplies. And so I think the question that we have for the committee is, do we want to maintain that additional effort that was made in FY19, or is this an opportunity to improve or increase that effort? Curriculum materials, we know that social studies is on the horizon. Our teachers, under Sue's direction, have done a really nice job of trying to identify programs and textbooks that make sense for us. You know that the social studies framework changed, and so we piloted some materials, and we would expect that, perhaps at the end of this year, we might come to the school committee with some requests for 8th grade social studies materials, but we also have to think about FY20, next school year. Athletics, again, same thing. Whatever feedback you have for us tonight would be appreciated in terms of the fee structure. We've talked a little bit about a family cap. And we also have kind of, for the last couple of years, increased the allocation from the general fund to athletics. And so I think that's an effort that we want to maintain. Question is that a place where we want to increase our effort? Again, a lot of competing. You see where we stood relative to the town's position, relative to what revenue might be available to us. And there's a lot of good competing interests, a lot of good competing priorities here. The other thing that you asked about the administrators and what they might be interested in, I think one of the things that would be high on our list relates to elementary supports. Our elementary schools are busy, busy, busy places. And these are large schools that are managed by a single administrator. And increasingly, they are challenged to manage the demands of evaluation, to manage the demands of new social emotional learning curriculums, to manage the demands of the behavioral challenges that we're seeing at the elementary level. So that's something that we've had a lot of conversations with the admin team about. And if there were an opportunity, and if it made sense to the committee, it's something that we would be really interested in talking to you about. High school, adjustments counseling staffing levels are, we've appreciated adding the second adjustment counselor, but the reality is with, 1,000 students with sometimes significant behavioral needs, social emotional needs, that's another item that we've discussed as an administrative team. Work-based learning, this is something that is sort of personally important to me, is trying to find opportunities for our high school students to be engaged in work-based learning. And so I appreciate the interest that the high school has had in this. So in the coming year, we expect that they'll try to carve out additional opportunities for kids to be involved in work-based learning. That basically means that they'd have opportunities to engage in learning in a real-world situation, local employers, local agencies, perhaps local schools. But we expect that would be, anything that we do in that area in the coming year, probably be budget neutral. So I'd say that's nothing that we need to worry too much about right now. Preschool sections, we've been watching that, trying to understand whether or not we're going to need to open up additional sections to make sure that we have enough peer role models for special education students at the preschool level. I think we're only in a watching and monitoring phase. Sue may have more info for us on that if you need additional info. Summer curriculum work and professional development. Technology investments, I think Tom is looking at folding in some additional investments just to make sure that we're able to replace aging equipment and to make sure that we're ready for the demands of MCAS 2.0. And then we've talked about some of the nurse coordination of nursing services in the district and making sure that we are aligned across all our schools and we're providing appropriate support to our nurses. So those are some of the things that are have occupied us, and the numbers 1 and 2, frankly, will chew up most of our decisions. There really won't be, frankly, a lot of room for discretion. But I think we also need to understand what the committee's comfort level is in terms of the general fund requests that we would make to the town. And then finally, at the risk of droning on here, 2 other items that aren't on the list, but Metco and school choice, right now we're building a budget assuming that we are making a level service commitment to the number of Metco students and school choice students. So, but I know that's also often an interest of the school committee as well. So that's where we are. It's a lot to balance and take in, and Tom has been buried in his spreadsheets and budget projections and has done a really nice job of tracking revenue and potential costs for us in the coming year. So any questions or feedback or direction, or if there's anything that I'm missing?
Yeah, I
here,
just
Tom?
want to add, I think, on the staffing. So you recall earlier this year, you guys approved 3 special ed positions, so the preschool nurse and then the LINK program had 2 positions. So they're going to show up in FY20, even though they were approved in FY19, they're going to show up as additions in terms of the funding in FY20, because we haven't made the budget transfers in FY19's budget yet for those positions. So they're going to look as if they exist in 19, but with no money associated to those lines as of this time. So whenever, next week when we present to you, those 3 positions will show up like that. And I think in terms of school choice, it's probably important for me to just, in terms of highlighting what Marty said, that level funding in terms of number of students doesn't necessarily mean the dollar amount we're receiving. So our funding is going to be down from what we budgeted in FY19 at the beginning of the year to what our allocation from the state is. It's about $100,000 less, and our number of students hasn't really changed, but it's because of students who have graduated or left the district, aged out, and we are no longer receiving some additional funding that school choice provides for. So that is the significant piece of reduction. So it might appear that we lost students, but that's not really the case. It's really funding that was associated to students above the 5,000 that we no longer will be receiving.
So can you clarify that with the school choice? Is that assuming we don't maintain the same number?
No, really what it is if there are school choice students that have an IEP, they give you some additional funding based on the services.
Yeah.
So we had a couple students who we were receiving additional funding for that are no longer in the district because either they graduated or aged out.
Okay.
So it's the money associated to
Right,
that
with their
component of it.
services.
So that's why our number of students is staying the same, but it's going to look like we're seeing a pretty substantial drop in revenue.
Okay.
But it's not because of a reduction in students.
Gotcha.
I had a quick question in terms of the enrollment projections. Without seeing the enrollment projections, I don't have that data that we've seen that before, the
long
with
sheet,
the,
yeah.
Yeah. Would you be able to speak to, is this incoming 6th grade the only spike that we're seeing, or were there other potential, I would say, bubble classes that we kind of need to keep our eye on that could go either way? I don't have the full.
I think that's the biggest area of concern right now.
6th grade,
Yeah.
incoming 6th grade. Yeah. I think as Marty indicated, our kindergarten numbers are significantly below where we were last year in terms of the census. If we were at the same number and where we ended up, I might be a little concerned. We have not had 4 sections in kindergarten at 2 buildings in the same year in my 10-plus years here. So I was a little surprised. I think that number seems to be a little bit higher than what we've had in kindergarten the last few years. So is that a new trend? I'm, hard to tell at this point. So I assumed we'd go with 3 sections for each of the schools for kindergarten next year. And then keeping all of the other sections in elementary the same. So the 4 that are in kindergarten at Blueberry and Center currently would move up to 1st grade. So those class sizes that kids are currently in would probably stay the same. But I think 6th grade would probably be the closest to a number where we would be concerned.
Okay. And that kindergarten number, I imagine, that's the most uncertain because I think we saw that big spike happen abruptly from mid-August right up until the first week of September. It was changing daily, if
Yeah.
I recall. Those numbers were coming in.
Where we are in the census this year compared to where we are last year,
We're better in shape.
significantly lower. I don't know if you can remember the number of students, but it was,
I think we're about 20 or so
20,
below
yeah.
where we were last year.
yeah.
Okay.
So we definitely got more of a buffer, more of a more room to absorb additional students.
So do you have a sense of where we'll stand with maintaining level services and level staffing?
In terms of the overall number, I would guess that a level service budget will exceed either of the amounts that the town had projected in those documents that Marty put up on the board. I would fully expect that our general fund request will go up, would need to be greater than that in order to have a level funded budget. Do I have that number yet? I don't. I mean, so it's hard. When Marty and I were talking this afternoon, it's hard to come in and say to you, okay, well, if you want to get to this number, this is how much room we have to consider some of these things. But because I'm not there yet, I can't necessarily give you that advice. I think our hope would be, if we walk out of here tonight, understanding what you guys think would be the priorities on this list. Again, some of them we're already incorporating, but others that are on here, but we haven't necessarily put into the budget yet. If we had the capacity to get them in, what would those priorities be?
And part of the conversation that's been this way for the past couple of years anyways is the select board's policies relative to the OPEB contributions, the capital contributions, and then the extent to which they raise to the levy limit. And so if we were to, I think inevitably we're going to be above what even the better projection is on the left. Inevitably, we're going to be above that, and so I think it would require the select board to reconsider, I suppose, its commitment to raising to 2% of the, rather than 2.5%, and reconsider their commitment to the OPEB and capital funds.
And I would imagine that would be contingent on a recommendation that would come out of the Finance Committee in terms of their advice on however long they're projecting out in terms of the 2 or 2.5 or how much to fund OPEB. I think they will have, I would imagine, something to weigh in on in terms of those guidelines. I would have one more follow-up question on the curriculum materials, and maybe, Sue, this would be something you could speak to. I know with the social studies and the civics, there'll be a need for that. I'm just wondering, is there like a prioritized list of textbooks that you feel like you're working on that, like, do we have antiquated books that you keep a list of, like, do you have prioritized needs for which ones you feel are, I'm imagining like a 10-year or a 20, like ones that you feel are an urgent need?
Elementaries are potentially up to 20 years old, depending on what grade level.
Okay.
Or more. We know for sure that we need civics. Civics is the one class that we knew we were going to need going back. So they've already started to pilot some textbooks, and they've narrowed down a couple that they really like. So we would love to make that purchase before the end of this school year, so they have it over the summer to plan. It's a lot easier in civics. It's 1 grade, 2 teachers working really hard together to get that ready to go for next year. And then K through 6, K through 7, are in the middle of their curriculum work. They're unpacking the standards, looking at the frameworks, determining, scope and sequence, and then starting to look at text. So they're really in the beginning stages. They don't plan to pilot probably until next year. So we're looking for a purchase on K through 7 next year.
Okay, and in terms of the high school, do you have like a?
They're a little even farther behind in the process, and because they're farther up the road, I think they are thinking they may need a supplement with some stuff, but they're not positive yet, depending on how they play their U.S. history and world history together.
Okay.
So.
That's helpful, thank you.
I think the first part is to look at where you are with level services and level staffing.
So levels, just to clarify, when we say level staffing, would you, or we can assume that we would go forward with building a budget that would reduce the number of sections at Center and Blueberry based on the enrollment shifts, is that? Okay. And so level service might be, might reflect reduced staffing at those grade levels as that bubble class makes its way to sixth grade. So,
Right, you wouldn't keep on a staff, yeah,
Right.
with those adjustments. But also keeping in mind the class sizes, not having them go up. You know, I look at that as
Right.
level service, level
The-
staffing.
The Glenbrook and Willie, that's sixth grade, you know, as we watch the enrollment there, you know, one of the options might be to assign the 12 unassigned students, you could assign them to Williams conceivably and add a section there. But again, I don't think we're at a place where we need to do that just yet. But if you were to assign if we could assign the 12 students to Williams, then you'd be in a position where you're potentially adding a section at only one of the schools instead of both of the schools.
And class sizes at the high school, I know we talk a lot about elementary and middle, but how do those look? What kind of position are we in?
So they haven't built their schedule yet. Talked to Tom Landers about it, and, you know, he seemed to think that there would be no reason to think that next year would be any different than this year. You know, we could get you a report on current class sizes at the high school, you know, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. It varies, you know, frankly, in the core classes compared to the third level classes compared to the AP classes, and but we're very pleased with class size at the high school. I have no concerns there at all.
So the next step is you will present at our full committee meeting, and at that time, will you have some more?
Yeah, I think at that time we would have, at minimal, a level service budget. Whether or not, I mean, obviously, some of the items on the list, especially at the top portion, would be incorporated, the contracted services for utilities. I mean, that's something I feel I would need to do and kind of highlight what the changes are that we incorporated into the budget, so you would know what items out of this list were already accounted for. You know, the attrition, the staffing, all of those contractual obligations, I would bring forward as part of the presentation the superintendent will be making on the 23rd. And then from there, you can see what that number is and provide guidance whether you want us to go back and incorporate some of these other items. The challenge we would have is from the 23rd to the 5th, we don't necessarily have another school committee meeting, so we would have to take back the feedback that the committee gives us and prepare the documents and presentation for the hearing for, I believe, did we settle on Tuesday?
It's the 5th.
The 5th?
Yeah, I believe it's 6:30.
You know, before the school committee would necessarily even see what those figures are. So that's just one of the, I mean, we could most certainly speak about them after the hearing, whether school committee anticipated those figures to be, you know, whatever they are, based on the items that are recommended. And I can do my best to come with some ballpark of what some of these items might cost, depending upon, you know, the direction of the conversation on the 23rd, and again, depending upon what that level service budget looks like in terms of the general fund increase.
Can you remind me again, Tom, about what we allocated last year in terms of the budget on to supplement the athletics? Was it
30,000 more
30K?
in FY '19.
Okay.
So Tom would build that into the projections for FY '20. Keep it at
Yeah, I
that.
mean,
Keep that at that. Maintain that level.
I would make that
of effort.
assumption for athletics. I would make the assumption for the supplies, the
How much
consumable
was that?
supplies. We did $10,000, $10 a student for pre-K through 8. My recollection was somewhere in that like $19,000 range, somewhere in that ballpark. So I would build a budget with that assumption still being in there. And then again, depending upon where that total general fund increase ends up at, whether or not we keep that or increase it, could be part of that conversation on the 23rd.
Do you have any, when you talked about the elementary, the 2 items that were listed as priorities for admin, one was extracurricular and the other one was the elementary supports. Do we have any sort of figure associated with, I know we were moving to the co-teaching model. Do we have any amounts associated with any of those items on there, the 504 management, co-teaching, any of the other supports?
Yeah, so co-teaching, I might separate from the other 3 items under elementary supports when I think that the first 3, and when you throw in teacher evaluation, I think that goes to sort of having, I think of it often as front office support, and so I think there's a few different ways of thinking about that in terms of supporting the administration and management of the elementary schools. We've thought about it in terms of counseling supports. We've thought about it in terms of the administrative hands that are on deck at the elementary level. So I think that if we, I think it probably does come down to getting a sense from the committee on the general fund request that you're comfortable with, and then deciding how much room there might be to address some of these needs. There may be, only limited room to address the needs that are listed here. So in terms of the costs associated with it, I think it depends on where we land in terms of that general fund request and what we might be able to do with any room in the budget. So I think our elementary principals would describe, I think they're incredible. They become busier and busier with the management of 504s, with the demands that are made on administrators, with the behavioral needs of children nowadays. And then the co-teaching part of it. We're not at the point yet where we have one special educator at each grade level. So in terms of the costs for that, Stephanie, I think we'd have to add at least one special educator at each of our 3 elementary schools.
Professional development as well, where that's concerned.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the numbers at the elementary schools are higher than the numbers at the middle school in some cases. And the level the playing field, I think, with supporting the administrators. They have a principal, assistant principal, guidance counselor, school adjustment counselor at the middle school. And at the elementaries, they have the principal and adjustment counselor, and then the special ed supervisor as well. But that's strictly a special education role these days, not stepping outside of that. So one principal is evaluating sometimes 40-plus staff a year. It's really hard to do a great
Yeah.
evaluation, when you're just trying to roll through them.
Yeah, and I think on the extracurricular, it's really going to be dependent upon how much, what kind of resources we want to put. I think Tom mentioned at a meeting recently about the number of clubs they run that aren't compensated for their time. I think the middle schools continue to look to add different opportunities for students and creating new clubs for them to participate in. So So I don't know that that particular line is a large dollar amount, but I think anything that we can do to increase the amount in those schools most certainly would be helpful. And even elementary, I think, kind of articulated a little interest in trying to be able to offer some after-school programs, as long as we're not competing with our enrichment program or park and rec programs, but to give students an opportunity to do some fun, different things after school. Again, what that figure is, it's, I don't know that there's a specific exact answer at this point.
So maybe there's not much of a choice then to see where we are when we're looking at level services and level staffing, and then go from there. And by level staffing, being cognizant of those class sizes and keeping them where they are, and if they've bubbled up, trying to address.
Yeah, ultimately, there may not be a lot of room to address some of these priorities, but we thought that it's important for you to hear it, for the community to understand it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's smart to address it in terms of like feedback that we've gotten from administrators in terms of like, I would call it things that they've identified for us to consider. So once we see how the actual money shakes out, then we can kind of, as a committee, discuss and prioritize where we can kind of put that money, whatever it may be.
And I would ask, are there things on here that we're not considering that maybe the school committee might, and again, not necessarily looking for an answer tonight, but for next week, if we didn't capture some of the priorities that maybe the school committee has that they would possibly want us to entertain in terms of finance and including in the budget for FY20. So.
Okay.
I think it's a good starting place.
Great. So we're meeting next Wednesday. When do we want to, and then we've got the hearing on the 5th. When do we want to reconvene?
I guess would Finance Sub potentially want to look at a meeting between the 23rd and the 5th in case there's feedback from the committee next week that at least we can discuss with Finance Sub to figure out what to incorporate for the for February 5th meeting.
What if we do, what if we try to schedule Finance Sub on the off week of school committee? So, like on the Tuesday on the off week?
So would that be
Like
the
the
29th you would be thinking about?
Yeah.
I have, unless we could do it earlier, I have the Parent Curriculum Advisory Council on the 29th at 7.
7. Maybe, do you want to see if maybe we could do it by, it's 5:30 tough.
That would be up to Ryan on a Tuesday. I would be okay, but I think you're probably rushed.
No, I can do it.
You can?
On the
Okay.
I can do 5:30. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so
That
let's.
works.
Do we need to check with LCT?
Yeah,
Did
I
they
think
weigh
they'll be
in on
okay.
that?
I can confirm with them, but
Okay.
let's put it down and
Tentatively
then
plan
I'll
it.
confirm.
And would this be?
And I've got to confirm the room too, so
Yeah.
we'll tentatively set it for the 29th. I'll confirm the room and I'll confirm with LCTV.
And will we only meet if on the 23rd there's feedback that we need to consider? So would it be possible that we don't meet, or would we plan on meeting no matter what?
We
I
can
don't
always.
know if we want to talk about that foundation budget stuff at some point,
I think we can just do,
and that's not as pressing in terms
Yeah.
of this, but I don't have any building use
how about
requests
we
either,
can
so.
schedule it. If there's no consideration for us, then we can cancel it, but we'll tentatively, since we have to coordinate the room and LCTV. And then if there's nothing,
We can decide later,
Yeah.
next week. Okay.
yeah, I think that makes the most sense. But tentatively scheduled for the 29th at 5:30, and I will confirm with Diane the room and then LCTV. Okay.
So we would, we'll prepare the budget materials and have them for you on Friday afternoon in preparation for the Wednesday meeting. Is there anything that you are hoping for? So typically, the budget materials include the line item reports from Tom, the account summaries, both at a detailed level and more of a general level. We usually have some documents noting the summary of the changes, the FY '20 compared to FY '19. Tom would do a staffing report.
Yeah, reconciliation of the
Yeah.
FTE changes and addition and reductions that were included to date.
Yeah.
We can throw some enrollment information in
Yeah,
there.
do
Yeah, and put the enrollment
Uh,
projections in, just so
Yeah.
people have
All
it
grades.
to look at.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good for the high school. I'd like to see if we could get a breakdown of all the classes in the high school. I don't know if we can do that. It would be helpful.
Every section?
Maybe,
Probably want something a little higher level, because every sector.
right, you're not gonna need to break it down
Pages
now,
and
but a
pages.
sense of.
Average class
yeah,
size by
what those
subject
classes
area?
are looking. Yeah, then you have different levels, so
Yeah.
it would be nice to see the averages for like honors,
Yeah, yeah.
AP, you know,
Yeah.
and how it's
College
broken
prep.
down,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So if anything else comes to mind in terms of what you're hoping to see in that packet with the budget, let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it'd be a good idea to definitely have it on Friday, because we want to be recognizing the 3-day holiday weekend.
Right.
So that the rest of the committee has time to prepare and look it over. Sounds good.
Alright. Anything else? Nothing?
I don't have
Right.
anything.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor? All right. That concludes this meeting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.